You don't understand, Traveler. The Fatui, they just went inside my home and took my kids. They even took my dog and they kicked me to the ground and just laughed at me. I don't know what to do. And not only that, they even took my vision. You know how hard is it to be visionless out here? Like it just makes me a normal person. I don't want to be normal. So that's why I'm here. What do you Please don't. Welcome back, friends, family, and fun. Today we're going to be talking about a big question surrounding the Genshin Impact community, and that big question is, should Genshin Impact add a skip button? Now, this question has been around the community for a while now, but it resurfaced again and became like a bigger question, I guess, since, you know, Honkai Star Rail added in the skip button, and this made players ask why we can't have this in Genshin. We've been asking for so long, longer than Honkai Star Rail is out, so why can't we get it? Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why would we have a skip button? Players don't read, or why would I want to read? The lore sucks. But whatever reason it might be, there is a lot of talk as to why it should be added or why it shouldn't be added. So before we get into this video, I'm just going to answer the initial question is, should Genshin add a skip button? And my answer is yes. Kind of. I'll explain later in the video, but today we're going to be talking about why people want the skip button in the first place, why it can be a great addition to the game, or why it can even mess up the game. So let's talk about it. So why do people want the skip button in Genshin Impact? Now, skip buttons in games are usually added to, you know, skip long dialogue of people not liking certain portions of the story, or have a strong dislike for a character, or, you know, they're just casual players and don't want to get into reading or just want to play the game just for fun. Now, there's a lot of reasons as to why people want a skip button, but I feel like, you know, the main reason why people want a skip button is it's been a staple in games for a while, and if you're a gamer, you know, you're used to a skip button and you're used to just skipping dialogue that you really don't want to hear, or you've heard about it millions of times, or you don't care enough about the lore, or maybe you heard about the lore from the video that explains it better and you can't be bothered to read it yourself, which is totally fine. I get it. There's a lot going on in Genshin Impact with lore, but I feel like that's some of the main reasons why people want it. But you know, it all breaks down into personal preference as to why people want a skip button in the game. And you know, since it's a staple in games, they've been asking, why isn't it in Genshin Impact? Especially since, you know, quests in Genshin Impact are getting longer and longer by the region. Yeah, by the region. Since, you know, Sumeru had like a huge jump in hours of, like, you know, dialogue. I think the entire quest ranges around 8 to 9 hours of you playing it if you're actually reading the dialogue and stuff, and it's only going to get longer, especially in Notcry. And if you haven't watched my video about what we can expect in Notcry, you should probably watch it, because, you know, why wouldn't you? And you know what, since you're already, you know, probably clicking out the video to go watch it because you're totally doing that, you should probably subscribe too. But let's actually get into the positives as to why it can be a great addition to the game. So let's start off with some pros of adding a skip button to Genshin Impact. Now, some accidents happen and some people's games might crash, or someone just might close the game because they need to do something, or their console just turns off, their PC just shuts off, or their PC just blows up. But there's a lot of reasons as to why someone might close the game on accident, or maybe even on purpose. So you have to replay the entire part again, and you don't want to click through all that dialogue again. So a skip button would be helpful in this circumstance. But obviously this is like a low chance of it happening, but it still happens to people. A lot of mobile players, their phone overheats over time, so obviously your phone's gonna crash or just turn off, or it's gonna give you that screen where it says you need to get off your phone, maybe even go outside, which, you know, I ignore that personally. But another positive is players starting a new account. Now, personally, I like to start new accounts as I find it really fun to, you know, go in Mondstadt, start off, beat a bunch of hilly churls with some insane character like Clorand, Moika, just absolutely obliterate the enemies since it's kind of fun. But I also really enjoy the story at the same time, and that's kind of why I replay the Genshin story quests, especially, well, why I replay Genshin in general. You know, there's a lot of stuff that can be missed, so I like to go back and just start fresh. It's kind of new. I like to do that in games, just, you know, go back, starting a new account, but clicking through some dialogue can be very Very annoying, especially if you make a lot of new accounts. You probably read through that same Mondstadt dialogue and you're getting really sick of it. A lot of players don't like to start new accounts. They think it's stupid, but oh no, I like to start rerolls accounts or just play the game like over and over again because I have an addiction. No, I'm joking. But, you know, it would be really helpful to add a skip button, you know, to just skip all the dialogue that I already know, or dialogue that I already played through, or dialogue that I really don't want to see or hear again.
There. The biological transformation is a lengthy process. As such, I too would recommend that we commence as soon as possible. In the event that a successful connection is established, his body will become permanently bound to the machine, and he will be unable to move independently of it.
But one of the biggest positives, and I feel like this has one of the most impact, is we add a skip button for casual players. Now, a lot of people play Genshin Impact solely for its combat and not for the story. Now, story-wise, I feel like Genshin has an amazing lore. It's a really well thought out like story. I love where they're going. But, you know, at the same time, there are a lot of players who just don't like the story. They just think it's, you know, stupid, or it's predictable, or they're just not that interested in storylines in games. And they like to play, you know, competitively. Like, you know, some people play for meta, where they only pull for meta characters, you know, to go destroy the Spiral Abyss with their insane characters and their insane builds. And people just really like, you know, building characters, or just like playing around in the Abyss, or trying the new modes in games. So obviously, casual players, they mainly play for combat and they don't play for story. And, you know, some things are locked behind story and levels, so obviously them skipping past it would be really helpful. And honestly, I feel like this would attract like a lot more players if we added a skip button, you know, since some people just want to get interested in combat and they're not really interested in the storyline. And if they were really interested in the storyline, they said they would just go watch a video on it, and they don't really need to get invested in whatever Genshin has going on with their story, since, to be fair, there is a lot going on in the story. I mean, we have an insane amount of lore. Like, if you like sat down and queued up a video of the entire Genshin lore, I promise you that's probably going to last for at least over 3 hours that they cover everything. Well, not even 3 hours, probably even longer. But some people, you know, shorten it. But, you know, if you really want to get past like the entire lore, I mean, there's lore hidden in world quests, story quests, books. And on the topic of world quests can get really long, and some people like to play, you know, for primo gems to farm them. And world quests, they take a while, especially with no dialogue. And when world quests have no dialogue, people just get really disinterested in the game, since, you know, people like to hear the voice actors. They get really interested when they hear their voices. And I brought this up in a past video with Notlin, since, you know, the reason why it kind of did so bad was because of the voice acting. Well, at least from English players or American players, so we didn't have voice acting for a while, so a lot of players got really, you know, disengaged with the story, as they focus more when they get to hear the voice acting. And world quests don't usually have voice acting. They don't have voice acting in general, so players aren't just, you know, interested in it, and they just want to skip past it. And, you know, casual players, they like to farm primo gems. They need to, you know, go through all that dialogue and actually play story to collect more primo gems, and some players just don't want to do that. And also, people really hate daily commissions and don't want to click the same dialogue over and over again, and really want to skip button because they're really lazy like me. Now, for some negatives on why Genshin shouldn't add a skip button. Now, starting off, we're missing out on a lot of lore. Now, I know I said that players, you know, really aren't interested in lore, but at the same time, people who are interested in lore, but, you know, really don't want to click through and read all that dialogue. They kind of just want to skip past it and watch a YouTube video on it. You know, it can get kind of, you know, annoying for players, since, you know, if you look into like a Genshin lore video and you go through the comments, there's going to be at least one person arguing, just asking a question about the lore, or spreading misinformation. And players get mad at this, saying, "Do you not read? This is why we can't have a skip button. You players like you don't read." So obviously there's going to be a lot of beef within the community, especially with a skip button, and players are just going to get really mad and spark a lot more arguments. But to be fair, this community has always been, you know, having arguments about everything, so I don't think this should be too much of a negative. But at the same time, players will be missing out in lore, and it's bound to spark more hatred in the community, and we really don't need that. But yeah, a lot of people complain about people not being able to read, or people just missing out on lore, and it gets really annoying for players, so that's probably it. Now, another negative that I can think of is, you know, it ruins like your total immersion in the game. When you're playing Genshin Impact, the storyline really grabs players in, and I feel like most of the player fan base is really grabbed in by, you know, the story, since it's a really good story. It has a lot of good writing. Obviously, there's some parts in the story that you would really want to skip with a lot of bad writing, but at the same time, when you're really involved in the story, I feel like it gets you like more sucked into the game. And when you're involved in the lore, I feel like it kind of like cancels out burnout within the game. You know, burnout when you play the game for too long and you get really sick of it and then not log back in for another couple of weeks. I feel like getting into the lore like really like helps like, you know, remove the feeling of getting burnt out and really makes you enjoy the game a lot more, since, you know, the lore is really interesting, like I said. And even if you're not like into too much lore, I feel like there's a lot of like things in Genshin that will really get you interested, or maybe, you know, even get you emotional, like the Fontaine story quest. But either way, you know, being involved in the lore, it gets you immersed in the game, or even just, you know, regular dialogue within the Archon quests, and they're really interesting. But of course, there are boring parts that players like to skip, which is totally understandable. But I feel like players will be like, you know, they'll just skip the button, they'll just skip any part that they don't like really like are interested in or think is boring, and it could probably be a huge lore drop that they would be really interested in hearing, and the skip button kind of diminishes that. But at the same time, players always, you know, spam through clicking the dialogue, getting to the other piece of dialogue, and some people are just fast readers and just don't want to, you know, hear the voice acting too. So there's also that. But at the same time, you know, this kind of adds on to the negatives on why we shouldn't have this skip button. It kind of ruins like the whole immersion of Genshin Impact to some players, especially if they're not a casual player or a meta player. I will say the reason why I think we should have a skip button is, as I said, there's a lot more positive than negatives in adding a skip button. But the main reason why I said kinda is I feel like skip buttons should only be embedded for certain things. Archon quest, I feel like, shouldn't be skippable, or shouldn't be skipped at all with a piece of dialogue, as, you know, the Archon quests are pretty much like the main core of the story, and there's a lot of lore that you can grab from it, or part of the main lore, and I feel like that should just like stay in place. I feel like it helps you get immersed into the game, you know, it helps you get interested and know what's going on, so you're not just like going into a fight or spamming through dialogue like you're in like Monster and then you end up in Nod Cry or something like that. You know what I mean. I feel like it should only, the skip button should only be added in things like World Quest, where the lore can get really confusing. And since the lore can get really confusing, people would prefer just putting up a video and not having to, you know, click through the dialogue of the World Quest and not try to understand it, as I understand why some people like may not be able to grasp a lot of the information that's being brought into the World Quest, as it can get a lot of it can get confusing for players, and that's totally understandable. So they might just want to skip past it and just get the Primo Gem so they can wish for the character that they want. I feel like, you know, adding a skip button will kind of ruin the immersion of games, well, of Genshin, kinda, but it's totally understandable if you want the skip button. So please let me know down in the comments if you think we should add a skip button into Genshin Impact. And you know what? Since you're there, you may as well subscribe. I feel like you should really subscribe, because like if you don't like subscribe, it's probably like a problem, and like you don't want a problem with me, right? Like, well, like we can really like fight it out on character for character. Actually, no, my builds are kind of bad, but whatever. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope to catch you in the next one. I really hope to catch you in the next one. Like,